Hello guys, thank you so much for coming back to watch another video on my channel. It has been a long time since we played Resident Evil Code Veronica and we've been waiting for that game for a long time. However, that wait will be over and we'll be hearing very soon from Capcom about an upcoming Resident Evil Code Veronica remake. Let's find out together as to why in this video. Recently, Capcom has turned into my most beloved gaming developers because they look after their fans and they do listen to what their community wants from them. They recently done a survey about the Resident Evil titles. They asked the community what sort of games they've played, how many games they've played, and at the very end of the survey they ask a question: which Resident Evil previous title they want to be remade into a remake form from Capcom, and that is very important. Now Capcom has been tiptoeing with Resident Evil Code Veronica remake because they haven't remade that game, and that game came out 2 decades ago, and since that time no one heard anything about Code Veronica, and that is one of the most beloved games. However, when that game came out, it wasn't very successful, so Capcom wasn't sure if to remake that game into a modern form, if people would buy into it, because it's not a mainline Resident Evil title. However, in this video you'll find out as to why Capcom would be eyeing to make a remake of this beloved Resident Evil title, Resident Evil Code Veronica. Before I start this video, I just want to say thank you to you guys who subscribe to my channel and the amount of love I'm getting from my videos. I just want to appreciate you guys. You guys are awesome, and due to that love, it gives me motivation to make more of these videos for you guys. Now, Resident Evil Code Veronica is the most demanded Resident Evil title, which fans been asking for this game for a remake for a long time. Now remember, this game originally came out on Dreamcast, and since that time all we've seen just a graphic upgrade which came out on the Xbox 360, and it hasn't changed much on the gameplay elements because the game was pretty much the same. Now, if you've been following Resident Evil community, Resident Evil fan pages, you'll be able to find out how much fans been asking for Resident Evil Code Veronica's remake, and even in the videos on the Resident Evil community you'll be able to see in the comment section fans all they talk about is a Resident Evil Code Veronica remake. Now Capcom is not blinded. Obviously they've been reading and they've been listening to the feedbacks from fans, and that's why they've made improvement on the games which they've been making recently, and that's why they've done a survey, because they know that they're making upcoming Resident Evil mainline titles, but the survey was all about a previous Resident Evil title, especially Code Veronica. So now Capcom knows, because the surveys, if you've seen, most of the people been talking about is Resident Evil Code Veronica. So I don't know if they've already been making that game. We might hear some announcements on a Monday's event from Capcom. However, based on the feedback they just received, they definitely will be looking to remake Resident Evil Code Veronica. Also, Resident Evil Code Veronica is important because it's a true sequel to Resident Evil 2's events. Story-wise, it makes sense to what happened to Claire Redfield after the events of Raccoon City. Resident Evil 2 had a sequel in the form of a Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, but that game, it actually plays in the same events around Raccoon City, and it's not a direct sequel to Resident Evil 2's events. The Resident Evil Code Veronica was the original title, where it shows you what happens to Claire Redfield after the events of Resident Evil 2. We've seen Leon Kennedy's storyline, because what happens in Resident Evil 2's events, I think 6 years down the line in Resident Evil 4, we've seen that he becomes a US agent. He's trying to save Ashley. On the other hand, Claire Redfield also survives the same events of Resident Evil 2 remake with Leon. However, we haven't heard anything what happened to Claire Redfield after the event of Resident Evil 2. So it would make perfect sense to make Resident Evil Code Veronica remake, because it will continue the timeline and the story for Claire Redfield after the event of Resident Evil 2 remake. Now, Resident Evil Code Veronica is actually a true survival horror game. It plays very similar to the original Resident Evil titles like Resident Evil 1, 2 and 3. This is one of the reasons as to why this game wasn't successful back in the days, because it was very similar to the original titles and it wasn't very different compared to what people were asking from Capcom at that point. They were looking for a brand new fresh start for a Resident Evil title, and that's why Resident Evil 4 title was very successful, because they completely changed the way Resident Evil title used to be, because we no longer had tank control systems, we had over the shoulder new camera perspective, and instead of survival horror we had an action horror game which play like a blockbuster Resident Evil title, and that's why it was very successful. But today's day and age, horror gaming is back to being popular, especially survival horror gaming. So it'll make perfect sense to Capcom to remake Code Veronica because it plays, as I said, to very much a true survival horror Resident Evil title where you do a lot of backtracking, where you preserve your ammo and you need to make some wise choices throughout the game. And that game, when it came out, it was actually very difficult to play compared to the original Resident Evil titles. Now the recent remakes which are coming out from Capcom, they've been very successful, not just in terms of fan and community, but also financially for Capcom. So it makes sense that Capcom wants to capitalize on this remake trend which they've been doing with the previous titles, and it'll make perfect sense that Capcom would be remaking Resident Evil Code Veronica remake, because that game is going to continue with the same trend of the remakes while also trying to be financially successful for the company. And Capcom knows how much fans been loving these remakes they've been making, because the remakes which they made recently, just like Resident Evil 2 remake, Resident Evil 3 remake, Resident Evil 4 remake, those games all turn out to be a massive success. Look at the financial report from Capcom, and all those games have made quite a good millions for Capcom. And there is no other game which has been beloved as much as Resident Evil Code Veronica. So obviously they will be remaking it, which brings to my next point, which is the added features and the new gameplay mechanics which they can bring into Resident Evil Code Veronica remake. Game originally felt very limited, obviously due to the system it came out on. However, now they don't have those limitations. We have modern gaming consoles which can power to afford those new gameplay mechanics, which you can do with the modern consoles like PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. There's so many mechanics they've already added in Resident Evil 4 remake and even Resident Evil 2 remake, especially with the knife. So I think adding all of those elements, and you can imagine what they can bring into Resident Evil Code Veronica, which would make that game to be an experiment Resident Evil title for Capcom, but it will also give them a freedom to add more features which could turn out to be a massive hit if they try to implement them properly. You can add more horror, you can add more atmosphere, especially with the lighting, with the RE engine. You can do so much better, especially with the mansions and the labs. Just imagine how much graphic overhaul you can do and the effects you can add, which can add to the horror element of the game. And the improvement you can not just only make on the gameplay itself, you can also change the characters, how the characters used to be. Because let's be honest, if you play Resident Evil Code Veronica, you would know how some of those characters like Steve were badly written in that game, and those characters affected the overall game. So if you remake that game in today's modern standard, you can also overhaul the characters, which would be brand new characters for the Resident Evil franchise. However, it would also elevate and give a plus points to the Resident Evil Code Veronica remake. And lastly, by remaking this game, they will be introducing this game to a new modern Resident Evil community. There's a lot of Resident Evil gamers out there who's never played Resident Evil Code Veronica. They've heard about it, but they never played this game actually, and they don't know how this game and what the story about this game is. And it will also give them a lot of backstory about the events of Resident Evil mainline series, for what happened with Chris Redfield, what happened with Albert Wesker, what happened with Claire Redfield. There's so many returning characters from the previous Resident Evil titles. There's so many new characters like Steve, and there's so many characters you can improve on, and you can further do sequels which you can bring these characters into those titles. And that'll be such a treat for Resident Evil community, because you'll be listening and doing the favor for the previous fans who've been asking for Resident Evil Code Veronica remake, but at the same time giving something new and fresh to the brand new Resident Evil community who's been playing recent remakes, and they would love to see a new game which is getting remake treatment which they haven't played previously. So looking at all of these points, Capcom definitely would be remaking this game, because they've been listening to their fans, they've been listening to the community, and they know what their fans been asking for and what their fans want. That's why they've been doing surveys, so they want a direct feed from the community. And to be honest, I'll be surprised that if they don't announce this game in 1 or 2 years time, we might even hear some announcement on the recent Capcom event. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with the points I've raised in this video? And if you do, please do let me know in the comment section down below in this video. So thank you so much for watching this video. I'll see you guys again with another video on this channel. Until then, look after yourself. Have a good one.